everybody. Today I am joined by Connor Fallon. He is from Golden Glitch Games. Connor, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing great, actually, and it's great to have you on.
Thank you.
So you guys recently launched Elsinore. Uh,
Elsinore.
is that how you pronounce it?
It is Elsinore, although I
Elsinore.
do
Okay.
like Elsinore
Okay.
as well. I've heard of that pronunciation a couple times.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess there's no like accent on it, so
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So there goes my assumptions for the day. So, but we'll talk about that. We'll talk about you starting Golden Glitch in that
Sure.
in a bit here. But first, I really just want to know what got you start. What was that moment where you knew that you had to work on games?
Sure. I it was actually way back in high school. So I knew fairly early on. Of- because a lot of people, tend to people figure out these things all over the place. I played I was just kind of picking up games randomly. I didn't really like have much thought into games as a hobby, and I happened to pick up Psychonauts, which is a game by Double Fine's first game. The whole premise of it was you went inside people's minds and fought their personal demons and various elaborate wacky metaphors, and I really liked that game. And I was trying to convince people that it was a really good game that was worth playing, and in the process realized that like I did not understand all of the things that games could do, because my ability to like really define what was great about the game was falling short, right? Like I'm like,
Hmm.
there's the levels are fun, right? Like it was just really limited. And in the process of developing that understanding, and trying to have these discussions with people, I started thinking about what games could do, and the idea that and there's certain things that games are maybe actually better at tackling than other media. And I came at the end of that evolution and being like, this is probably the most interesting field that I could work in as far as like creative media. And from that point on, I was pretty determined that that was what I wanted to do.
So before that, did you have any creative aspirations? I mean, where did you write or did you, do any
Yeah,
art
I
or
mean,
anything like that?
I did a bunch of writing. I oscillated between thinking I want. Generally, I think most driven towards film.
Hmm.
I dabbled in being thinking I'd do theater as well, just because those were the two programs that were common in schools at the point that kind of spoke to me. And yeah, so but I definitely think film. If in that alternate timeline, I probably would have wound up doing film. Um, and film is fine, but I'm glad I am where I am, because they're definitely now like a lot of the things that I was thinking about all the different things that games could do. Like we're just seeing a ton of people doing those things now, right? There's
Hmm.
so much diversity in the sort of games that are being made, and what kind of experiences they're creating for people and the impact that they want to have on people. Um, that it's just an exciting medium to be a part of.
Yeah, it's interesting how games have gone since even the previous generation. I mean, because when I was
Yeah.
leaving high school, that was when you had the Xbox 360 and the PS3, and that's when you started to see that. But then now
Yes.
it's broadened so much, and it's insane how quickly that's happened.
I mean, like when Psychonauts came out, that was like the PlayStation 2,
Hmm.
Xbox generation, and I was in so many of the conversations that I had with people were just along the lines of trying to convince them that games had any value whatsoever, right? Which is
Yeah.
like it's still a little bit of a thing, but I really feel like there's at that point, and part of it was my lack of in-depth familiarity with the medium at the point, but um, there's just so many examples that you can point to now that you back then there was like Shadow of the Colossus, and
Hmm.
there was a much narrower set of things, and indie games also have like exploded in the time in between, which has obviously like led to a lot of more niche games like ours being made. And that I think that's helped a lot as well.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you. So you know that you want to work on games at this point. You've been inspired.
Yeah.
You have that
Yeah.
inspiration. How do you start going about that?
Well, so there was how I thought I'd go about it and how I actually went going about it, which of course pretentious me in high school was like, I'm going to convince, I'm going to attract the attention of someone at Nintendo, and I'm going to found my own company, and I even designed a terrible logo for it in Photoshop, and I did none of those things. I wrote a lot of game ideas down in journals, but like, obviously, like they were all, one of the big lessons was like, one of the things that a lot of people run into is the games they play are a lot of mainstream blockbuster games, and so when they first start thinking about making games, they dream big, right? And that's not a great starting point a lot of the time. There are stories of like Valve hiring like studios who made like mods and things like that and immediately getting into AAA, but that tends to not be the case. You need to start with something that's smaller. And so what happened is I went off to college, and there was this club at my college called Game Creation Society. And Game Creation Society was this is at Carnegie Mellon, and that club still exists. It was basically just in your free time. There was no games program in the undergrad there. All you people come together and pitch games and try to make them over the course of the semester while also doing all their homework. So like the scope constraints were really intense if you wanted to make anything reasonable, right? If you wanted to finish anything, you had to make it really small, and that was and you also had to keep, if you're running a team, you had to keep them excited about what you're doing and bring them together when they have so many other things to do and there's no financial motive. And so a lot of what my early actual game dev making was through that club with a bunch of my friends who are the people who are in Golden Glitch now, and there's definitely a connection there that I can talk about more and how Golden Glitch works later. But I went through that club and I made a bunch of ridiculous games. I made like a game called Beestruction, which was like about like sending an army of bees at things to destroy them. A game called Chicken, which was just about running from a chicken. That one I actually made with Katie, who is one of my co-founders, and the team lead for Elsinore. There's just all these little, just trying to take these small ideas and execute them as reasonably as you can over the course of a semester. And then it turns out the way I actually got into the industry, the next step was the local game studio, one of the local game studios, Shell Games, my last semester at Game Creation Society, decided to sponsor our release event, which is where everyone shows off their games. And Shell Games does a lot of different things, but their big focus is transformational and educational games. And I had just happened to decide to make like a take on the Ace Attorney formula, which was Socrates Jones Pro Philosopher, which was Ace Attorney, but instead of debating whether your client is innocent, you're debating a bunch of dead philosophers about whether their ideas make any sense. That got my foot in the door, and that was my first job, and then that was how I got in.
Okay, so you get into Shell Games. I've heard of them because I'm close to the Pittsburgh area. But I think a lot of people probably aren't as familiar because, like you said, they work mostly on educational titles. Yeah,
I mean they do educational and now their second pillar is really VR. And they also do like theme park and amusement installation style things, which you might have encountered one of the things that they've done, but like a lot of the time those are for like some client that has a big name that's bigger than theirs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So yeah, that's where I started. And my first project was actually working with Fred Rogers' company.
Oh, wow.
Which was the most wholesome start to a career I could have ever. Definitely not how I pictured starting my career, right? When I first became interested in games, but like, it was again just like that exercise of the specific goal that client has was these games should make 3 to 5-year-olds' lives better, right? And that was a really cool design challenge to start with. And there's a lot of projects like that at Shell Games. Shell Games had a huge diversity of projects. My last project there was, the flip side was I Expect You to Die, which was a VR Bond puzzle game, Bond-style puzzle game. And like that was kind of the fact that they worked on so many different things was a nice extension of my experience in Game Creation Society doing different things every semester. And I was able to really like flex different design muscles on every project.
Yeah, that's really awesome to hear, especially just getting a broad sense of what you can do just by staying in one spot.
Yeah,
it seems like that's a great place to start from the learning tree, as one would say. That is Shell Games. So at this point, you decide to move on from Shell. Where did you go next?
Yes. So I actually decided to leave Shell mainly because I was homesick. Because I came from Seattle and I love Shell Games to death, but they're kind of they're not really. There's not a lot of other game studios in Pittsburgh, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know I'm speaking to someone who now works at one that's not too far away, but there wasn't much of a game community at the time in Pittsburgh. And so I decided to head back home to Seattle actually before I had an offer somewhere else. So I kind of moved out there, and Elsinore was already underway at that point. So I was tinkering with Elsinore, and then I went to indie meetups, and then I applied to ArenaNet, who was hiring a bunch of people at the time. And it was interesting because I don't play MMOs, and ArenaNet's main game is Guild Wars 2, which is an MMO. But they saw something that they liked, and I've been there since. And they hired me, and I've been there since. And it's been a really similarly like to kind of in a slightly different flavor, but like when you're working on an MMO, you're making such a massive world that there's a ton of opportunity to carve out like little corners and like choose like particular cultures or like aspects of the world that you care about and really zero in on them. Whether that's the most recent ridiculous thing I did was we had an episode that was really focused on these ogre like cat people that we have in the game called the Char. There's talking about like having opportunities to carve out like little corners of culture in this massive world, and like we had an episode where we were doing like a Char party, and the Char are ogre like cat people, and one of the things I was like that would probably be at a party is a music festival, and I had the opportunity to like to make an in-game interactive metal concert, which was probably one of the most ridiculous things I've made, but lots of things like that. Lots of opportunities to do weird little things.
Yeah, that sounds like a really cool, like, just insulated thing that happens in a bigger world.
Yes. Yeah.
So it seems like you've gotten a lot of cool different opportunities working for ArenaNet, working on Guild Wars. So what do you think has your work on a bigger project like Guild Wars informed your work at Golden Glitch?
So I would say our work on Golden Glitch is mostly informed by, obviously we take a lot of lessons from all of our projects, right? Mm-hmm. We all work at a bunch of different big studios. But the core of why Golden Glitch works, which I should probably give some context on Golden Glitch itself.
Yeah. Let's go back a little bit. And so you decided to form your own studio. You're one of the founders. Yes. So how did that happen?
So when we were in Game Creation Society, there was a contest that we ran where the theme was Shakespeare, and Katie came up with the basic idea of Elsinore for that contest. Katie Sharonis, and we talked about it, and we were both like, "This is a really great game idea, but there's no way talking about assessing scope. There's no way we're making this over the course of a semester or even while we're students." So a year or two into our careers, like in the actual industry, we kept revisiting the idea year over year, and we're finally like, you know what? Let's reach out to our friend Eric, and Eric Butler, who was also in Game Creation Society, is a very talented programmer, and see if he'd want to join us to like actually start making this thing in our free time. And then he's like, yeah, well, you know, my at the time girlfriend, now wife, Kristen, who was also our good friend, you know, she's working in a lot of things that are on her PhD that are relevant to this. Like, she should totally be involved in the loan. We're like, absolutely. And we kind of wound up like snowballing a little bit and gathering a whole bunch of people that we'd had really good experience working with in Game Creation Society, kind of our circle of friends from the time, and coming together again, but this time to make games like as a studio, but in a similar format, right? Where we're meeting like once a week, maybe twice a week, to some weeks, to like make a little bit of progress on a game until we eventually get it out.
So, you guys basically had the idea for the game before you even started the studio, essentially.
Yes. The studio was formed to make the game.
Yeah. So in the formation of the studio, did you encounter any issues early on?
I mean, one of the things was always like, just how do we keep people motivated, right? Especially when we're working, like, one of the things that's nice about Golden Glitch is because it's a free time studio, we're not financially dependent on it, but it also means that there's less financial incentive. So it's just like making sure that everyone feels heard, right? Part of that was in the very structure of the company itself. Everyone who is part of the company is an equal, like, we all founded it together. We're all like equal shareholders in it. And that helped, you know, that's one of the things that helped resolve a lot of the things. But I think an early problem that we did have was with that equal ownership, there was a bit of like, well, who makes calls about certain things, right? So we did do a thing where, like, you know, Katie's the team lead, I'm the lead designer. We had point people that we eventually picked that were responsible for, like, hey, everybody's like thrown their stuff into the pot, and your job is to like filter through it and like shoot and be like, okay, this is the synthesis of what everyone said, right? So it's still a very collaborative, like, democratic thing. It's just one person who's basically responsible for like filtering and documenting everything.
That makes a lot of sense, because at our studio we have almost a similar makeup. I mean, we each have a share in the company. But yeah, we pretty much, at that point, I mean, it was Kent's idea to make the studio, so we had him in charge of everything. And
yeah,
and I think that's worked out for us. But for us, we have, I would say, a bit specialized paths for each of us. So it's
yeah, I mean, there is definitely, like, people have clear special. Obviously, like, not everyone's doing everything, right?
Yeah.
But I think because it's a small team, people are able to have some input on everything, like, and ultimately, like, it's the person, like, Wes is our art lead, right? Like, he won't be like, I'm going to do this. Connor, I'm not going to be making the final calls on like what our art style should be. Wes always will be, but we definitely, like, there's an opportunity for everyone to weigh in on everything, which is nice.
Yeah, it's a good way to have that collaboration and just have a discussion of how you each feel that this thing should go, although ultimately it's up to, you know, whoever's leading that part.
Yeah.
But I actually really love that collaboration, which is why I'm very happy to be on a small team.
Oh, 100%. I will say, I say this a lot. When the Elsinore that we released is not the individual vision of anyone on the team. Like, we all had individual visions coming in, and they were starkly different in some ways. And there's it's a weird synthesis of a bunch of different ideas that we massaged until they all worked together. And that resulted in the game being as kind of interesting and weird and unique as it is. I don't know if I should. Are we assuming some familiarity with Elsinore, or should I give a brief background?
I know a very little bit about Elsinore.
Okay. So Elsinore, to the actual game we made that's out, is Groundhog Day plus Hamlet. You play as Ophelia, trying to stop all your friends and family from murdering each other. The issue is that, they're all Shakespeare characters, so most of the things you do result in them finding new and exciting ways to kill each other. And that is word for word the summary that I gave to through everybody I talked to at PAX. But the more developer-y side of it is that and this is the part that Eric and Kristen were really big on, and that would not have been a thing if it was just me and Katie, for example. Is the way our game actually handles the events is that it has a simulation core that tracks what everybody knows and wants, and uses that information in order to dynamically schedule new scenes. And the scenes are all handwritten, but basically but they can happen in they're more like free floating than it would be in your typical branching tree model. Yeah. And then we have a bunch of logic to alter lines just enough to make it so there's a coherent through line in whatever chain of events that you've gotten.
Wow, so that seems like there's a lot going on in the background there.
Yes. And part of the big question and part of the big design question was how do you expose this and make it accessible and understandable? How much do you need to expose versus how much do you just you're there's cool stuff in the background, you don't need to worry about it, right? Our game notifies the player anytime there's a model change, like this character now knows this, or this character now wants this. And originally they were highly programmatic statements, and there was always a discussion of one of the discussions was how elegant should those statements be, because fundamentally they're exposing a programmatic element, right? And the more programmatic the statement is, the more obvious it is that there's some sort of sim thing going on, which people get excited about. But also it can be confusing. It can be, it's a balance to strike. We wound up going with there's a statement in quotes that make it clear that the thing in quotes, while it's a very clearly written sentence, is a node that has been added.
So that would seem like there was just a massive amount of work to do on this game. How long did it take you to actually make Elsinore?
6 years.
And
6 years, but this is 1 day a week with a couple weeks where we worked 2 days. Sometimes when we were feeling ambitious, we worked Saturdays and Sundays.
Oh, wow. So basically on your weekends for 6 years, you made this game.
Yep. We met up on Skype, and part of it was we met up on Skype every Sunday from 1 to 6, and everyone can attest to if you were in a relationship or just making plans with friends, you'd be no, everyone knew that Sunday was Elsinore Day, right? Just because we had that regularity was key to us actually getting it done. And again, this was a trick that we learned. One of the tricks we learned in GCS was don't rely, especially if people are doing things in their free time, which Elsinore, despite being a studio now, is still very much doing things in their free time. Don't ever count on people doing things during the week, right? In their on their own. What we did in Game Creation Society was get everybody in a room and have them work for a couple hours together, and you'll ultimately accomplish more than you would if you give them the whole, quote unquote, the whole week online on their own. And Elsinore, because we didn't have the luxury of all being in the same place, I was in Pittsburgh, Katie was in Seattle, now she's in California. We moved around, right? Some of us were in Seattle, Kristen was in Atlanta. We would meet on Skype, right? And so we'd have a Skype call that was open the entire time where people could ask each other questions, compare notes, have impromptu discussions, kind of like being in an office space, right? But digital. And we just worked for about 5 to 6 hours on a Sunday, and then it was an opportunity to hang out with friends and also get a lot done.
So outside of the actual game development part, what was the challenge for you, at least from having a social life and a real life and that sort of thing?
You mean obviously it's your Sundays are gone, right? Yeah. That's tough. I think it's our group was just all. I mean, this is a group of people who made games in their free time in college when it wasn't benefiting their grades at all. So we have a group of people that's very motivated about the creative process of making games. It's also one of the things to note is these are all people who were our good friends from college. So in a way, hanging out and working on Elsinore was a way to stay in touch and checked one of those social boxes, right?
Yeah.
And also like we were careful to not let it become too consuming, right? Like if someone had something that they really wanted to do, they would totally skip a meeting, right? It's just that there was always at least a couple people working every Sunday. Duncan was very active in acapella and cared about. He's one of our programmers. Cared about acapella a lot. There were times when he'd go on shows on Sundays, and that was like well understood part of the thing is that this is something we are doing because we want to do it, and ultimately it was more important that people were able would still want to do it, and people want to do it more if it's not interfering with other things that they want to do in their lives.
So yeah, it seems like you guys almost saw working on the game as a good social time for yourselves as well. So
yes, I mean it definitely was for people whose companies or when periods where their companies were more inclined to crunch, it got hard. I was lucky in that neither of the studios I worked at were crunch inclined. But but that was also a good reason for people to not work, right? We'd be like, hey, if you're just tired, don't work this week. Other people can do stuff, or we with other not being financially dependent, we could always just push the game back. Or there was no one being like, we'll pull your funding, or no one who wouldn't be able to eat as a result of Elsinore not coming out this week. And we made that call a lot, right? We were very much the especially with the 1 day a week, we were the idea of, it'll come out like early next year. And then we would always genuinely believe that. And then it was just like, no, in order to really make this game work, it's going to take longer. And also in order to make sure that everyone's good, it's better to take more time than to really, really push ourselves.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It seems like you guys took the steps to make sure you guys took care of each other at the same time.
Yes.
So
yes.
Yeah.
And there were it is in any development process, there were times when things got heated, right? But those were often the times when it's like, okay, we needed there's something wrong about the way we're approaching this, and we always took those as an opportunity to reassess and adjust. Rather than enforce a standard that we established that we must do it this way.
So you guys are making a game for 6 years.
Yes.
6 years is a long time.
It is a long time.
So that long to make a game, did the game see big changes in that time? Is there a reason? Was at any point did it take longer because you had to change some things?
There were a lot of small shifts that added up over time. I think most of the big changes were early on, where we originally we were like, it'll be more like a Telltale stuff, and it wound up not being that a lot at all. We were the whole other way where it was like we experimented with Twine, right, and being like, it's just a text game where everything is time passes as you click on things. And finally, we went to this isometric. You're free to wander around, and time passes more like Majora's Mask, where time's just constantly ticking, and if you talk to someone, it pauses while you read the conversation. And so there was a lot of experimentation early on, but once we decided our core, we pretty much stuck with it throughout the whole thing. But there were a lot of the how information is communicated changed, and we did cut things. We cut quite a few things. We had a whole system that we thought would be a huge part of the game called Small Talk, where basically you could click on a character and be like, tell me the random thing that's on your mind. And it was, I think it was in an alternate universe, it would have been a really nice ad, but it ultimately wasn't key to the game. So we made a lot of calls like that, right? This thing would be cool, but we don't need it. And it ultimately, inventory, we had a whole idea that we'd have an inventory system. That's just not a thing. All of the things you interact with are information that you're sharing with people. Lots of stuff like that. The biggest reworks were how we present events, how we help people track things, and just how to communicate the thing we set out to make to people in a way that they could understand.
So you have this game, you're working on it for 6 years in your spare time.
Yes.
How do you, as a team, decide when are we going to show this? When are we going to show people what we're working on?
I think so. I think this is actually one place where we made a mistake. Although it was good motivationally and helped us make leaps of progress. We kept showing. We had a round of showing the game, I think, too early. Not like in that it developed bad press because people liked it. Mm-hmm. But the game had severely underestimated the amount of work to. We severely underestimated the amount of work to the final project. And to the end point, and therefore, like we'd be showing it to people, they'd be like, "This is really cool," and then it wouldn't be out, right?
You were talking about how you guys may have shown too early.
Yeah. So, like the thing about a game like Elsinore, where it's a narrative, you've got a bunch of narrative, and you've got a sim. Is kind of two things that both have this trait. Mm-hmm. Creating a slice that feels good, a small slice, and being able to show that happens fairly early on. But the amount of work it requires to iron out all the edge cases and all the different branches that you want to do, there's a lot there. So we had a slice early on, and we showed at GDC, I think way back in 2016 maybe. It was our first demo, and it's funny if you look at the game when I actually was just cleaning out my Google Drive, and I found a whole bunch of old videos, and I sent them out to the team, and they were like, "Oh God, how could we have ever shown this?" Because like one of the things was like, yeah, it was a decent realization of what we were trying to do, but it just every year there was measurable progress, and it got better and better, and ultimately like the point when we knew it was ready to release was really when no one on the team was like, "Oh my God, like there's something that I will deeply regret that's in here," right? Or that's not as good as it should be. And like, it was also like the flip side of that was not holding ourselves to the standard of a studio that has a full-time art team is I think the big one, and making smart choices about like reusing assets and doing things like that, reusing animations. But ultimately, the big thing that was very helpful for us, showing it was helpful because it got us some information. But the big thing that was most helpful for us was our backers, because we kickstarted the game, and we would periodically release backer updates, kind of like a closed early access thing. We didn't want to do actual early access.
Yeah.
And people who wanted to could play it and give feedback about what was working and what wasn't working. One of the other signs was like people's comments would get smaller and smaller, and eventually it was like, no, this is ready to go.
So you were able to take that feedback from having a successful Kickstarter to figure out exactly when it was ready for prime time.
Yeah, exactly.
How did you guys go about the process of actually deciding when to release? I mean, obviously you have all this information from backers and people playing the game that, hey, your game's good to go. What made you come to the decision to release it when you did?
I mean, so we kept setting. I mean, I when I was saying about like we were continually setting target dates for ourselves throughout the entire development process, and basically what we do is a month before that would be like, how do we feel? Okay, here's a new target date, right? So essentially, we decided to release when we did because we had just barely missed the previous target date that we set for ourselves. And then we're like, and we could be pretty certain that we were going to hit the next one, right? And that's when we announced, like, this is when we're actually coming out, because we didn't want to run the one thing we didn't do that a lot of indies run into the problem of doing is we didn't announce and then have to be like, actually, well, we didn't announce and then have to be like, we can't release then. Except we did, but that was because the Steam Summer Sale was coming the day we were originally planning to release, so that was a terrible idea. So we did push it back, but not because like the game wasn't ready, but because it would have been a terrible idea to be drowned by, you know, every game being 2,000% off.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that if there were anything that made you think about changing where it was placed, whether it's other games coming out or obviously
and that
Steam.
That was a really hard choice to make, right? Because we had done that push and we had been like, Elsinore is coming out June 22nd, and then we start to hear those rumblings, right? Because it's always like it's semi under wraps, and it's like that's the day of the Steam Summer Sale, and we're just like, would be a really bad choice. And so we ended up being like, hey, we have to push back a month because of, and we basically framed it as because of like the other events that would happen in the time period. We weren't sure, but it wound up being the actual date. This sale did launch that day.
So do you feel you guys made a smart decision by moving it back?
Yes, absolutely. Just like there's, you know, Steam is visibility is the number one struggle for an indie developer, and I think it's something that we struggle with. It is less bad for us because again we are not financially dependent upon this game, that this is a problem, but ultimately delaying it a month gave us more time to like reach out to people and be like, hey, like really, like one, we now, because we worked for that original date, we can send you a basically final version of the game. Two, that's the big one. Two, actually, we still released to our backers on that day. And so there were a couple things that backers found in that final release that were like, okay, we now have like a time to fix one or two things that we don't want to have in the final build. So it was just a final wave of really useful feedback, right? And I want to come up with a third one, but I'm drawing a blank. So there's 2 points in a 3-step plan. Come up with a third one that's amazingly clever and
launch.
Pretend I said it. Yeah. What? Oh yeah, and launch. Then we launched the game.
Yeah. The game launched. It's out there.
People like it.
People like it. Have you? It's out on PC. Have you decided whether or not you'd like to bring it to other platforms?
Ooh, I mean, it's obviously a thing where everyone's interested in, right? But it's just again, we work 1 day a week, right? Yeah. And there's also like having released the game, we've got to figure out like, you know, what is worth spending the effort towards at this point. So I think it's safe to say our primary commitment is to continuing to get the PC back in Linux version in front of people. Obviously being, you know, it's always nice to think of what could come next.
Yeah, especially since everybody wants every single game on the Switch now. So
everybody does want every game on the Switch. It is true.
So I'm sure it would be right at home if you were able to do it. But obviously 1 day a week, that's, you know, that would take a rather long time probably to to do that or to be able to do that. For you personally, what would you like to see next for Golden Glitch? Do you want to work on something new, or do you want to continue to work on Elsinore?
Well, I mean, one of the discussions is if we continue because Golden Glitch was formed, as I said, for Elsinore, right? Yeah. So like, is that a brand that will keep around? I do know that I personally want to work on something small, you know, that I can turn around more quickly than 6 years. It's back to that classic, like, hey, to return to the Game Creation Society roots, right? Yeah. And like make something really small that, and then maybe I can embark on something bigger after that. Again, it's what is honestly most likely for Golden Glitch is you're going to see the people who worked on Elsinore making a bunch of basically breaking into smaller teams, and whether it's under Golden Glitch or as their own thing, they're going to be making a lot of cool stuff.
Well, that's awesome. I hope to see what cool stuff that you're doing next.
Yeah,
absolutely. Elsinore seems like a really interesting project, and eventually I will definitely check it out.
Yeah.
But being a poor indie game dev,
100%. I understand.
Yeah. You understand where that is.
There's a lot of games out there, and that's what I'm saying about visibility, right? Like
exactly. Yeah.
But yeah.
So for you, if you had to give a small indie game studio that might be listening right now to your advice, some advice, what would you give them?
I mean, Elsinore is a weird one, right? But there definitely is something nice about, especially if you want to make something that's very artsy, not being financially dependent on your game. It is possible to do this on the side of also working on another game, and you just kind of have to assess if that's right for you. But if you do, you'll learn a lot of things from your other projects that you can then apply to your indie game. My other piece of advice would be like, this is something that people tend to do with their small things, but the people you're working with are more important than the game you're making, especially if they're your friends, which you probably should start looking to your friends, because those social connections are really, really helpful for keeping a game motivated, like a team together. Ultimately, it's the relationships that you're going to have with people, the people you're working with, that are going to make or break the game, and also are going to last after the game is done. So yeah, that's my big thing. Is it's about the people. It's always about the people.
Well, power to the people. Well, Connor, I want to thank you for being on today on How to Build a Game Studio. Where can people find more about you, more about Golden Glitch, more about Elsinore?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter at Connor E. Fallon. Elsinore is at Twitter at Elsinore Game. The game's also has got its website. If you search for Elsinore Game, you should find it. It's available on Steam. It's also available on itch.io. Again, you can find links to all of that on our website. I recommend checking out Katie's Twitter account, although she talks about a lot of things, not just Elsinore. I tend to only talk about the projects I work on. But yeah, most of the team is available if you play the game and you have any questions about like specific things we did. We're all happy to talk about them. So, yeah.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for being on. I absolutely appreciate it. I like hearing from other people, other studios, and what they're doing, because I feel like it's great to gain some knowledge from people who have done other things.
Yep, I agree. The more we can swap notes, the better off we are.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Well, thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you, Trevor.